I'm happy to introduce our next lecture from Dietmar Pichler, called From Forged Documents to AI, How PsyOps Have Evolved and Which Traditional KGB Tools Are Still Used by Russia and Its Allies Today. Just give me a very short introduction to our Mr. Pichler. He is the director and founder of the Disinfo Resilience Network. He is an analyst specializing in disinformation and foreign interference. He is also an advocate for stronger democratic resilience and effective response to the threat posed from authoritarian regimes such as Russia and their allies. Pichler also serves as a vice president of the NGO Vienna Goes Europe. Please give Mr. Pichler a very warm welcome to the stage. And by the end of the lecture, you will have some time to pose your questions, perhaps only 10 minutes. So please prepare some short questions so we can address all of them. Thank you so much.
So first of all, thank you, Vice, for organizing this extraordinary conference. We're really very nice and interesting speakers. And thank you, everybody, for caring about this extremely important topic. Here, by the way, on the screen, I hope you can read it now. If you want to have the presentation, just contact me, follow or add me on some of these platforms, or ask me for my email address. You're welcome. Let's stay in touch, because we heard a lot about staying in touch, building networks, and I think this is one of the most important ways to battle disinformation and to battle this foreign interference campaign that is not only going on since 2022, but especially since 2014 and long ago, which we, by the way, are going to hear during this short presentation. By the way, we don't have a lot of time, so I need to skip a couple of slides. This is why I also offer you to send it bilaterally. I want to start my presentation with a couple of findings that I'm convinced of that are not in the presentation. So first of all, we need to realize that we are indeed in a world information war. And the thing about an information war is, in an information war, there are no civilians. That means everybody in this room and outside this room is a target of disinformation and is a target of foreign interference by Russia and its allies. And there is indeed, like we heard it before, an alliance of evil countries. I will even dare to call it axis of evil. I know there is some past with this term, who is targeting our democratic societies. And basically it is BRICS plus against us. And this is something we should always have in mind when we open not only our social media channels, but also our television sets, and when we go to conferences. Not these conferences, we have very good speakers here, but it's not always the case, especially when we take a look at talk shows on TV, also in the German-speaking world, Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. So when we speak about active measures, or how the Soviets called it, активные мероприятия, this is an old term. It comes from the Cold War. And when we speak about it and when we think about it, it's a part of the history books. And this is already the first mistake. It is not history, it is the present. Everything the Soviets did back then to influence Western countries, they are still doing everything. And I can tell you one more thing. They do even more now. And I'm still not mentioning online operation. I'm still not mentioning social media and troll farms. They do more of these offline operations because they can use the materials and the agents of influence and all the content they produce on their offline operations to put them online. For instance, if you have some professor from a university, let's say for instance from the United States, who says NATO is responsible for the Russian attack, who says the US is always warmongering or something like that, that's perfect content for social media. Maybe you hear this on a kind of conference, somebody is filming it, or it was on TV. That's perfect content. That's so much better than some random anonymous troll. And when we are outside of social media in these days, when we focus so much on the digital world and the digital warfare, our guard is down. Because we think books are okay, or are always okay. We think university professors are always valid sources. We think mainstream TV, there cannot be any Russian influence. It's only social media, they say. But that's wrong, and that's very dangerous because our guard is down when we speak about all these traditional ways the Soviets already influenced our societies. Hmm? Okay. It's still very, very. Yeah, I understand. It's still a little bit small letters. So when we speak about active measures, it is not only disinformation campaigns, it's much more. It's subversive activities. It is influencing our societies. It's changing the way our public opinion is going, and it's also about lobbying. Yeah? It's about forgeries. It's about creating scandals where there is no scandal. In the historic way, it was always very interesting for the Soviets. We heard a lot about Africa. There were a lot of active measure operations in Africa. When they accused the CIA of trying to kill somebody or trying to overthrow a government or something like that, we heard this conspiracy a lot of times. And then they had documents. They forged, of course, these documents from the CIA or from the US Embassy. But you know, when the lie is around, then it's very difficult to stop it and to debunk it. But during the 80s, the Americans tried it during the time of Ronald Reagan. And they created the so-called Active Measures Working Group. And it was the first time we had something like a fact-check department in the United States. The first time they put some effort and they recognized that there is a problem, that there is a challenge. And it has a worldwide scale. And there are a couple of reasons that I summarized why offline operations still matter. And I want to start with what I mentioned before. Our guard is down, because when we speak about disinformation, when we speak about fake news, we think about Facebook, we think about TikTok and so on. We don't think about university professors, we don't think about TV. So this is why it's very beneficial to do something on traditional media. Then we have lobbying and personal interference. When you have an agent of influence, when you have somebody who is in the pocket of the Russian Federation, this person, it's not only about influencing public opinion, it's about influencing our politicians, our economical system, the stakeholders, the people who are very important, influencing journalists. Then you can do a lot more than when you just post online and you can reach a couple of people. And we saw a lot of that in 2014. We had these agents of influence. Some were maybe paid by Russian proxies, some may did it because they have some business interest in the Russia that is not so directly connected, but what they did, they influenced our opinion leaders. And this is what active measures is about. It's not only about randomly spreading some fakes or some ideas or narratives. It's about infiltrating the society in its core. And then what I also mentioned before, of course, offline operations, they produce content that is very valuable on the online world. And when I say, before we had a very interesting presentation also about TikTok, and what I see in this TikTok and in Instagram Reels, I see a lot of content, videos from the offline world. From TV, from universities, I hear speeches, I see people with a microphone in their hands, and they're telling a lot of rubbish, a lot of Russian narratives. Usually short clips, so you don't hear the answer. And when you have in public TV, let's say in German TV, let's say you have a certain politician from a party called the Left, formerly, and now has her own party. I don't mention her name. You see her speeches online, but you don't hear the response. You don't hear the other person who debunks her, who tells her that it's not true. It's very one-sided, very biased, very strange what she says. And this is how it works. And then I want to tell you a little bit more about what happened back then and what didn't change at all. And this is the Russian, no, not the Russian, Moscow's infiltration of the peace movement. And there was an organization called the World Peace Council that was obviously a KGB influenced and Soviet founded front organization aimed that the peace or the dismantling of weapons should happen only on the Western side. And what was the goal about it? Of course, to give the Soviet Union an advantage in the Cold War. And these movements, we saw them everywhere. We saw them especially in Germany. They were huge. And I mean, you remember that time, yeah, when people were gathering, tens of thousands of people. We need peace. No to NATO. No to the US. Army go home, which means Americans go home. It was not about Moscow. And what for sure they didn't care about were all the peoples who struggled for their independence, for their freedom in the so-called Soviet or socialist bloc. They didn't care about the Solidarność movement in Poland because it was a Soviet infiltrated movement. I mean, in some cases it was maybe a naive approach, yeah, by some pacifist, but in many cases it was, and we know it because it's in the history books and there's a lot of proof for it, that it was highly influential and infiltrated. This is a CIA document showing the file of the World Peace Council, and I would highly recommend to read about it. It's very interesting, and what I also find interesting, that recently I was at the Austrian Independence Day, and there are usually rallies against our military. And I met one guy who was a representative of the Austrian Peace Council and was very connected to this World Peace Council during the Cold War. And I asked him, isn't it a Soviet thing? And he didn't even deny it. He said, yeah, back then it came from the East, but you cannot be so strict with us. Yeah? Oh, I forgot a very important part. What about the narratives of these movements today? It didn't change at all. The only difference is that Ukraine is now an independent country on the map. It's not, now it's again occupied by Moscow, yeah, because of the war, partly occupied. But back then, it was the Soviet Union, it was Moscow, and now it's still Moscow and the Russian Federation. And also back then, it was about nuclear weapons and spreading the fear that Moscow and the United States can start a nuclear war and we all die. And in this fear, there was only one solution for the peace movement, that the West needs to back down and that Moscow has to prevail, so we don't risk to start a nuclear war and destroy each other. And here on this picture, this is Code Pink, an American peace organization. They were invited in dubious conferences in Iran. They were spreading all the conspiracy theories about Ukraine, about the so-called coup d'etat at Euromaidan, about NATO expansion that Russia was provoked. And during their rally for peace, such people show up. I mean, not to mention the Soviet flag in the background. But if you, I mean, everybody knows what this set is about, yeah? So is it really about peace? And they were co-organizers at the so-called Summit for Peace in Ukraine in Vienna. And And more than 50% of the speakers at this peace conference were formerly guests at Russia Today and Sputnik. So they are not neutral negotiators or peace activists. They're clearly siding with Moscow's narratives and maintaining their victim blaming and both sadism and false balance approach. If it's even a false balance approach, if it's not obviously a pro-Kremlin approach. And then I will tell you one thing that almost nobody mentions, and I'm very sad about it. When they say that Putin has been a KGB agent, they are completely right. When they say that Putin is using the KGB tactics still and the activnie meropriatia, they are also right. But what most lecturers forget to mention, that the people who got influenced by the Soviet operations, by the so-called peace propaganda back then, or peace activism, they didn't call it propaganda, it was propaganda, that these people are still influenced. And we can prove it because many of them are, fortunately of course, we don't wish anybody to die, except some occupants maybe, but they still believe in the same narratives. They still have the, let's say, very soft approach towards Moscow, very hard approach towards NATO and Washington, and they still say that they are so afraid of a nuclear war. And there is an article of this Austrian magazine, there is also sometimes something good coming out of Austria, not very often, but in this case I'm really proud, this is why it's in the presentation. And this article, the title of the article is Peace Movement, the Enemy Stood in the West. It's of course ironically because it tells the whole story about this bias, this anti-Western bias of the German-speaking and Austrian peace movement. And we have several names in the article. And guess what? All the people who were so concerned about peace back then are now quite anti-Ukraine and anti-delivering of weapons to Ukraine and doing to some extent victim blaming or have some special relations with Russia. And this is one classic example. I guess some of the German people here will know about it, Generals for Peace. This is also something, without mentioning names, because I don't want to get sued, but it's also something we have now. Former NATO generals who are advocating for peace. And everybody's asking, who pays them for that? And this is the General for Peace movement, which was, and it's very interesting, highly influenced by the Stasi, which was the secret service of the GDR, of the communist Eastern German state back then, yeah, Russian, Soviet occupied, and also by the KGB. And this is gold. This is pure gold if you're interested in classic agent of influence and how they work now as well. Because here we have a guy who is not alive anymore, so he cannot sue us. He was a scientist, an author, a political figure in party politics, also active, a peace activist, all at the same time. You will never find us as an agent of influence who has all the characteristics of agents of influence from Moscow. And he cooperated with the KGB and with the Stasi. And what he did basically is that his whole agenda was to prove that there is no danger from Moscow, from USSR, and it's only the West, and we should dismantle, no weapons, no rockets, no Pershing II rockets. Yeah, I get many of you remember that time. So it's really a textbook example. I think it's the best one. If anybody who has more characteristics of a classic agent of influence, please send it to me. And this is another example. A huge campaign of agents of influence in the US where influencers, now we're in the digital world, and you see here, this is blue, social media influencers, and I highlighted it in blue to show what is new. Because nothing else changed, it's just that they use the digital world as a tool which is highly efficient and cost efficient also, and also effective because you can reach a lot of people and you can target them also in an efficient way. But despite that, nothing changed. It's just the social media. And they are more far-right influencers, but they also pay more left-wing influencers, and they use proxies like they used to do. I have an example. Wait, where is it? I will go here. How they pay. This is something I found at the Historical University of Vienna department, and it was for free, and my mom gave it to me. She said, maybe that's interesting for you. And all these Khrushchev propaganda speeches, it was very similar to now, which is kind of funny. It sounded a little bit like Lavrov, but that was not what's so interesting about it. The interesting part about this propaganda paper is that it was published by the KPÖ, by the Communist Party of Austria, by their publishing house. So that means they gained, the Soviet Union paid them to print that. And if you print something and if you receive a lot of money for it, it's a way to finance yourself. And I talked to an Austrian, a little bit, I think he's 60 plus, 65 years or something, and he told me it was, for us, it was completely clear. When they had a lot of loudspeakers and a lot of papers and a lot of printed materials at the peace rallies, then we knew that the Soviets paid again. This is something, ladies and gentlemen, we need to speak about. All these proxies, all these ways of paying that are not by envelope or by an official transfer. And this is something, because we also want to discuss what changed. This is something we definitely didn't have back then. And it's not only about the social media part and that it's in the digital world, but that we have so many people who are not not politically active or not political at all, who are involved in propagating authoritarian regimes. And this is the world of the influencers, of the travel influencers. And they are, here the examples, most of them show China, which is a perfect example, but they go to a beautiful developed part of a city and they say, look, the Western media is lying to you, China is not as ugly as they tell you. And then I always say, no, Western media never said that China is ugly or that they don't have nice buildings and even districts. We speak about human rights violations, we speak about them allying with Russia, we speak about territorial claims, we speak about Taiwan, we don't speak about their building. It's a straw man, of course. But what is interesting about this Western media is lying narrative, it aligns 100% with the Russian narrative. It works well because when they all tell us that the Western media is lying to us, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Venezuelans, the Cubans, they don't have the same reach, but China and Russia, they are very strong and very good in this. And it works, there's a strong effect because if everybody tells you they are lying, then one day you're going to believe it. And you see here, there is one example, the influencer campaign, Chinese performance on the border with Russia, Druzhba, it's all about Druzhba, about a kind of showing, they are so strong together. And it has two ways. First of all, it wants to show us Westerners that they are united against us, that we should better subjugate to the BRICS Plus community. And the second message is, maybe you want to join us. Look how beautiful it is. It's light, it's friendly, it's Druzhba. And some people don't get it, especially if they are on these lifestyle social media platforms, because everything is so subtle and it's not obviously political, and they don't care. They think it's cool, and the Americans, they don't do it, the Germans don't do it, and they think, maybe China is the future. They are producing everything, so why not? Back to history, or not. Biolabs. Sounds quite like 2022, but it's not the moment it started. the Soviet Union, one of the most influential and most prominent campaigns of the active measure program was that they spread the fake that the Americans developed HIV. And they did it so successfully that still so many people believe in this conspiracy theory. They planted stories in communist newspapers. They were backed by scientists, agents of influence, in the GDR, who said, yeah, of course the Americans developed it. And I'm a professor, so I know it. And that works fantastically. And after it went to this Indian newspaper, it went all around the world and is still believed by many. There are surveys also in the United States that a significant amount of the population still believes that the conspiracy is either true or could be true. Yeah? And in other regions of the world, even more people believe into that hoax. And what we see in 2022, they like to repeat. And in 2020, Georgian Biolabs, the Georgians invented COVID-19, or the Ukrainians invented COVID-19. If you spread enough fakes, we know all this Russian strategy, enough stories. If you have 10 variations of the truth, or 10 variations of the truth. If you have 10 alternatives to the truth, would be the better way to say it, then maybe one of them has to be true because there are so many. Yeah, it's even maths. Yeah, I mean in our psychological way of thinking, of course. And there's another thing that changed, which definitely changed compared to the Cold War and the classic active measures, is that two things changed. First of all, China is now a much powerful actor than it used to be. And the second thing that is, I think, really a remarkable difference is that we are now not only the far left or the peace movement is connected to Soviet ideas or to Moscow's narratives or to anti-Western narratives. It's also the far right. And we have even another problem that people forgot that it's not only the far right. So I'm here to remember all of you. I think in your case it's not so it's not important because you are aware of it, but I would really like to remember the world. First of all, it's not only the far right who believes in Russian narratives, and it's not only social media where we see them, but we have to acknowledge that the far right is very open in believing the Moscovite narratives about so-called traditional values and all these anti-Western things against the liberal, progressive, collective West. So they buy it and they do it very open. The left sometimes does it a little bit more subtle. Not in the case of Stalinists, of course. They are like they always have been, DKB and so on. But what is also different, and I'm really surprised by that. I mean, Donald Trump is maybe a little bit different, but also the far right is very fond of China now. And I remember that a couple of years ago, there was a prominent far right Austrian politician, and he was a guest at the Austrian-Russian Friendship Association, and he was introducing his Chinese association. I don't remember the exact name. Yeah, so China, Russia, all these alternative to the so-called collective West. It's one big story, one big alternative. And if you don't like your life, then you have an alternative, and you have somebody to blame, and it's usually the politicians and Putin and Xi and all these strong men. They provide a kind of alternative for these people. Does anybody recognize this place? Yeah, I want to really highlight how much I admire Mr. Henry, who went very often to this place and showed the difference between right and wrong. And what happened to him, not only once, is a shame for us Europeans, a shame for us Democrats. But this is not the only Russian house. They are everywhere. And it's only one example how they use culture, how they use economy, how they use kind of infiltration that is, in some cases, by demand, that subverts our society, changes the way we perceive reality since decades. And we are not quick enough to get rid of all these myths of this Russen kitsch. Yeah, some people say in Germany, and I think it's also a term that is quite good, that quite fits. And yeah, so Henry has had his birthday yesterday. I will repeat it. Happy birthday, Henry, and don't stop showing what's the difference between right and wrong. And because it's in the title, a couple of words about AI. This example, who knows about this example, this most ridiculous example when Zelensky told to surrender? I mean, everybody can see it's obvious fake. Yeah? But of course, it's getting better. Okay, I think it's that. Now it works. Okay. So what you see here, this is a scene from the movie Terminator 2. And this scene was cut out of the movie because it's a little bit ridiculous, and there was already quite some humor in the film, so they decided to cut it out. But actually, it's here the Terminator. He's an AI, yeah, but he has a physical form played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he's analyzing a gentleman how to learn how to smile. And this is what AI is doing. It's analyzing us, all the pictures online, and it's trying to learn to mimic us, to imitate us. And you see it totally fails. But unfortunately, modern AI works much better than the Terminator could do it. But, it works again. Why do I show the example of a Terminator? I want to ask the audience, is anybody here who can answer why the Terminator looks like a human being? Why does he need this? I mean, he has metal underneath, he can kill everything, he's super strong. Why does he need to appear like a human? Who wants to answer? Who volunteers?
To kill us better.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Because you don't recognize he's a machine when he approaches you.
Emotion.
Yeah. I mean, he walks like, and Arnold, his way of acting, but the main point of the Terminator is he's an infiltrator unit. And exactly this is what the AI is doing online on social media. They use a human appearance on their profile pictures, and what they can do right now, they can speak to you, you can have a conversation, and it's much smarter than it used to be 10 years ago, because it all started 2014 with the so-called the troll farms, the Russian, the Internet Research Agency, and the bots. They were so stupid back then. But now, they don't do the grammar mistakes anymore because they use ChatGPT. And they use also AI to rewrite articles from Russia Today and to put it on new fake websites. You don't need journalists anymore. And the worst thing is, you can create agents of influence. You don't need to pay some stupid Westerner to be your mouthpiece in the West. You can create an academic. There are fake academics and fake journalists writing pro-Russian articles. And here we have a case that makes me so angry every time I think about it. There are several videos of this young lady praising the Chinese-Russian relations and everything. Yeah, you can read it yourself, yeah? And they used the appearance of a Ukrainian girl who was a YouTuber. So the AI scanned her liking, and they used a real person. That's the worst thing that can happen. Usually they don't do it. Usually AI is unique in being not real. Thank you. Yeah, and we are already in the final steps of the presentation. if you receive my presentation, if you send me an email, please watch all these YouTube videos because they explain how the historical active measures work. There is not a lot about it. There are only a few documentaries, and I say they changed the way I thought about disinformation very much, because there is so much more about it than troll farms and fake pictures. It goes so much deeper, so much more subtle, and we should really do more about it. Yeah, and just finally, I want to say that I'm the founder of the Disinfo Resilience Network, which is an initiative and an idea, a vision to bring people together from different fields, historians, journalists, also politicians, academics from several fields, diplomats, cybersecurity experts, but not only cyber, as we heard before. And yeah, feel free to join the Disinfo Resilience Network. It's a loose connection. Nobody needs to be participant or to be member of some NGO. So everybody can participate. Can participate. So thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for this inciting lecture. So now, okay, we already have a few questions. You can just simply approach me because I have a mic here. Okay, let's start with you. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about countermeasures, such as like a little bit more aggressive countermeasures, such as popularizing the term of useful idiots, and like sort of trying to push this so that this label, not only because that's something that we sort of came up with, but the label that they use themselves, and sort of popularizing this fact that some people who are under the influence and who become like really tools in their hands, that they are being labeled as such. Thank you.
In my opinion, the most important countermeasure is to speak about it, to recognize it as a way, as a channel of disinformation, because at the moment we don't do it. I mean, especially in Austria, when we speak about disinformation, it's only social media. Agents of influence, they don't even have it on their radar. And usually when I'm invited to go to a panel discussion, you know how it works. I'm sitting here, there are a couple of other people, and we speak the usual topics about troll farms, and then when you go to the wine reception, then you say, did you hear what this guy said at the university, and did you see what this professor said? Oh my God, maybe he is paid by Russia. You speak it only, we need to make it public. We need to be more brave, more bold about it. But people are afraid because, of course, it's easier to blame some anonymous troll. It's easier to blame some internet company or some social media network that they should do all the work. It's not so easy to accuse somebody who maybe sues you, and many people got sued. We have a lot of slap situation, and it's allowed. It's completely okay to spread Russian propaganda, unfortunately, but it's not okay to criticize them, and that's something that we need to change. And of course, the best thing is to expose if they are paid, because when we know that they are paid, this is when it ends.
Thank you. So maybe.
Okay. It works. All right. I have a couple of questions, but I will phrase it as one question probably. So one of them is, do you think so about this soft power? Should we kind of start throwing away Russian ballet from La Scala, Vienna Opera House, and so on? And I mean the Russian house, cultural house as well. Then did the West kind of learn something from Vietnam, because this pacifism kind of movement it came to the fact that US kind of let down South Vietnam, and we saw what happened. And this is something which can happen again to Ukraine. And the Western, I think, especially US public, still feels very good about it, of leaving Vietnam, and feels like they didn't learn their kind of a lesson in this sense. And the last part of this question is, I think now Russian researchers actually publish quite actively also on propaganda detection, for example, in the AI field. And I see then that in acknowledgements, they actually say that they were funded by the Russian Federation Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They're absolutely open about it, but the current way science works with anonymity, basically, they are never caught, and they are just published on big Western and international conferences. And what can we do about it?
A lot of questions. I try to memorize them still. Yeah. So I will start with the Russian house or Russian culture. I think I don't want to discuss if we should ban this or that, but I want to discuss the question: do we recognize that it is an issue? And we don't even recognize that it's an issue. Only a few of us recognize the problem. And I say 50% of the analysis is already the solution, because if you're aware of something that is a kind of influence campaign, then you also create some kind of resilience to it. So that's the first thing. About research which is funded by Russia and other authoritarians, this is a problem because they influence our universities, and we have a problem in Western universities. And recently I'm very proud that I organized a panel where two very well-known academics in Austria discussed contrarian academics and their influence campaigns that are connected to universities. So we should discuss this without taboo. And what else did you ask?
About Vietnam.
Yeah. Oh God. This is extremely controversial. I think, it started back then. And it was the peace movement during the Vietnam War was highly also organized by USSR, because it was also for them a proxy war. It doesn't change that the US committed war crimes in Vietnam, so I want to make this crystal clear. But we have a way that we perceive the history of the Vietnam War that in many cases even center people from the, even conservatives in Austria, they think that the Viet Cong were the heroes. So this is also a very kind of twisted reality. So I don't justify the Vietnam War. I don't say it was a good thing, but I agree that we need to speak about that openly. But it's very controversial. I understand that.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Just one question, but I'll make a little extraction to further on. When you say that it's already a step in the right direction to talk about Russian influence and actors of influence, agents of influence in Western societies, are you just like coming back to the former topic of Mr. Pomerantsev that he talked about there? Like, for example, like the fact that fact-checking doesn't work on an emotional engagement level. That, for example, we saw for like a couple of months ago here a big news scoop actually about Mr. Sebastian Krah and the connection between the AfD and the like foreign agents of influence. A sort of a big swoop, and a big emotional swoop kind of was left out there. So are you really sure that, like, are there any more active approaches to the countering the agents of influence? Like, for example, if we are talking about like AI tools, it's could be conceived as a double-edged sword that could also be used as a weapon against disinformational structures. Just like spitballing here, but for example, maybe some of you have heard about the AI persona that was launched by Vodafone to target scammers. A couple of weeks ago, they also made a big media shabam about it. So, like, coming from there, would you see AI or like AI bots and bot programs, chat programs, could they be also utilized for pro-democratic approach, let's call that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, because recently I spoke to a woman from the Austrian press agency, and she's a fact checker, and she told me that certain AI bots, they send them false requests to fact check something just to keep them busy, and maybe we could do the same with AI. So I think there are a million ways to use AI in a very useful way, also to counter the disinformation or to counter the foreign interference, or to analyze it, for instance. And we already do this. And about the agents of influence, I think ignoring them will not work, because the problem is that they get a lot of platform, and I know so many cases where almost nobody is aware how problematic some certain actors are. They are not aware that they were million times guests at Sputnik, at RT, that they give interviews to Iranian state media, that they give interviews to other authoritarian or conspiracy theory sources, that they are active in very radical NGOs. They are not aware about their statements, about anything. And then recently a young student came to me and he said, this professor, but she's very good, she's very good. I said, do you know that this is a Bucha denier? And I think if somebody is a Bucha denier, then I cannot hold myself and say, yeah, we better ignore her. I think we should not platform Bucha deniers anymore. And we have a lot of them in the academic sphere. Yeah? So I think awareness, raising awareness about that cause and debunking and exposing them wherever we can find them, exactly like the Active Measures Working Group did during the 80s, because they will never stop if we don't do it.
Ivan Kuritsin, volunteer group Vienna Goes Europe, Hamburg, Germany. Yeah, so from practice in city Hamburg, there are almost 2 million people. Unfortunately, in the city where we acting and performing our Ukrainian actions, every 2 or 3 months are also so-called peace demonstration organized with these peace pigeons flags, but also with Russian flags, Soviet flags. So one woman comes always with a balloon in form of a Russian rocket. And so that stuff is peace demonstrations in the second city of Germany by population, and these demonstrations are tolerated, at least from the local authorities, which authorize such actions. My question is that now, after the disarmament of 90s, of 2000s, of 2010s, the European countries seems to be a bit weaker, as they were in the armies seems to be weaker as in 70s, for example, and 80s. And why should we recognize these people just as useful idiots? Because now they are obviously not only useful idiots, but the people who are waiting for Russian liberators here, and who obviously can give them a key from the city Hamburg as well as city Berlin to Russian soldiers, Russian liberators, and they should be recognized in this quality, I would say. But unfortunately, they are still tolerated.
Yeah, I think this is a very complicated question, and I totally understand your point. In my opinion, I mean, we don't have the data. I think it's a very mixed movement. It's infiltrated, of course, and there are openly pro-Russian people. There are also very naive, pacifistic people. There are conspiracy theorists. I mean, some pre-Israelis, there's the far right marching together with the far left, and some old Greens who don't support the new green policy, which is supportive of Ukraine. So it's extremely complicated. I don't say that they are all collaborators and they want to join Moscow. Some people maybe really think that Moscow has peaceful views, which I cannot comprehend, to be honest, of course. We need to draw a line between somebody who is a collaborator, who is promoting the war. Germany has laws for this, as far as I understand. In Austria, we don't do anything. For instance, we had a situation that the Ukrainian embassy had an exhibition with some construction for the exhibition with information. It was not even about the war, it was just about Ukrainian agriculture, Ukrainian economy, Ukrainian culture. And some Vatnik put big sets on it, painted big sets on it, and we washed it away then. And this was not a hate crime. It was just damage of property, according to Austrian law. And this is a catastrophe. We need to to adapt the judiciary regarding that issue. We need to understand, but we also need awareness, and we need a society that is resilient to these narratives. If we say they are just a bunch of crazy guys who are actually promoting Moscow, then they have no effect. Yeah? If we say they just want us to subjugate to the Kremlin, then they will not have an effect. But if there are still people outside who think that these crazy gatherings are about peace, about just peace, about a fair peace, sustainable peace, then we have a problem. And some people, unfortunately, they call me and they say, but why are you against peace? What is the problem with peace? Are you for war? You are a warmonger. And I say, no, I'm not a warmonger. I'm against occupation. I'm for international law. And I know, and this is one very important part, what can we do against these peace movements who are not about a real peace? We need to explain what Russian occupation means. We need to speak about torture. We need to speak about rape. We need to speak about looting. We need to speak about all the kids that get deported to Russia. And about the filtration camps and so many other things, about the Russification. And when you mentioned all these points, then somebody should tell you, yeah, better not fight back. No, it makes no sense. And there is a certain, and we discussed it also here during the conference, it's about psychology. You cannot convince everybody, but we need to convince the people who are ready for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I see the raise of hands who still have some questions? So we have only one question, and I think we can cover this, and it will be the last one. Thank you.
Oh, sure. I'm going to raise a little bit maybe a problematic point. What we see, and I'm very curious from the standpoint of security, what is your opinion about it? Because I understand that we have to cherish the diversity of opinions and the freedom of opinion. But one tendency that I believe many of my colleagues have observed, and we certainly have, is that in West, both in Europe and in the US, there is this tendency of having like this open arms for dissident journalists coming from Russia who been critical of regime there and who continue to be critical of regime there, but don't really go through the processes of questioning a lot of narratives and biases that they've grown up in. So they come here, they manage to land very lucrative jobs in media, etc. And even though they are critical of Putin, they continue to sort of reinforce these colonial narratives about Ukraine, or like in my case, I'm curious, I have observed this many times about Georgia, including like I can name like names, including like Muratov saying that of course there was this promise that there would be no war, but then there was this sort of but then Saakashvili started war and things like this. So what is your standpoint from what is your opinion from the standpoint of security to this tendency, and what are like the ways to counter something like this? Because these are, I understand that for the many people it's already a big deal to be a dissident, but our issues, a lot of cases have much longer historical roots and much deeper implications than just Putin and just like this modern aggression. Thank you.
So thank you very much for this question. It's a very important topic. So first of all, I forgot to mention before, it's not only social media, it's not only the far right, and certainly it's not only Putin. And when the Russian opposition says it's only Putin's war, it's not true. It's in Russian society. There is this long history of imperialism. There is the teachers educate the kids in that way, and also there are so many politicians, so many fighters, and so many people who are completely convinced about what they do. It's not only Dugin, yeah, but just comes to my mind. Yeah, so I think everybody who says this is just simplifying the problem. And I think we need to recognize the situation as it is. If Ukraine is not able to defend itself, if it doesn't get the weapons to defend itself, it's going to get destroyed. And Russia, what Russia is doing is a cultural genocide, and they are very open about it. When they speak about denazification, what do they mean? It's not about Nazis, it's not about the Zelensky, the Jewish Nazi. It's about subjugating Russia, to installing a puppet regime and to annexing all these territories. And if they don't have the weapons to defend themselves, then Russia will succeed with this evil plan. And I'm not afraid to call it an evil plan, simple words for something that is quite obvious. And which brings me to my point. If certain figures of the so-called Russian opposition say that they are not sure what they should think about weapon deliveries for Ukraine, then they are not really in opposition to Putin, then they are supporting him. And this is very disappointing. So I've differentiated this. And about the security issue, yeah, about spies, you never know. Yeah, this is very concerning. But I mean, I'm from Vienna. The whole city is full of spies. So for us, it's not new. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
There's
one final one. So a really short one, because we have like 1 minute for. Yeah.
Okay, just a final, very short one question. What do you think is the influence of those classical anti-American resentments in Germany and Austria that we have since the last big war on those pro-Russian narratives? Do you think it's they're like enabled by it because they fall on a very sort of fertile ground?
Oh, I'm so glad that we got your question also, yeah, even if we're almost out of time, because that's a core issue. So you can be every dictator in the world. You can do everything. You can kill people, as many as you want. You can rape them. You can subjugate them. You can do everything. You can starve them. You can eat them, as long as you are against the US. You have some people who are going to defend you. And this is happening since many decades. This anti-Americanism is one strong motive that we should never underestimate. And it goes, in Austria it's even worse, because we're not a member of NATO, so we are neutral, and our neutrality means we are neutrality towards reality. We created a different reality, where there are both sides about everything. Yeah? There is no good and evil or right or wrong. It's just neutral. It's just a fog. Yeah? And the anti-Americanism is one huge motivation behind such way of thinking. Uncle Sam is responsible for everything. Yeah?
Okay, now it's our turn to create our own reality where truth and justice persist. So, and on this note, we would like to end this discussion here in 6 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, in 8 minutes, we have our final panel at our big auditorium. So please enjoy your break, and we will see you afterwards. Now, a big and warm applause for this amazing one.